Welcome back to Chris's Creative Corner, Episode 9. I should think of a tagline, shouldn't I, for Chris's Creative Corner? Like, Chris's Creative Corner, where Chris is creative while sitting on the corner of the couch. That sounds accurate, actually. I don't know if that's a good tagline, but it's an accurate one. Anyway, what I'm doing on this podcast, for those of you who don't know, if you're tuning in for the first time, welcome. We are talking books. We are talking about my books that I've written as I'm an author, and we are reading them together. I don't know if we're reading them together. You're listening, I'm reading, maybe you're following along with a book, which would mean that we're reading them together. So yeah, that's totally a thing. Today we have 2 questions to answer for questions for Chris. Am I using enough hard k sounds? I don't know. I might have to try a little harder to be more creative with the... Maybe I could curse more. No, I'm just kidding. So yeah, questions for Chris. This is a little thing where I answer 2 questions that have been sent to me through one of the many channels that I'm available, whether that's my website, whether that's TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, in person, through email. Once I got a carrier... No, just kidding. I didn't get a carrier pigeon. I would accept a question, though, if it came from a carrier pigeon. I would also probably try to pet the carrier pigeon. And then I would get bit, because that's usually what happens. So the first question is actually a really hard one that maybe I might have to talk through a little bit. It says this is a writer friend on TikTok. They asked, do you have any suggestions to help me become a better writer? If so, what are they? And to anybody who is part of my counseling program or has taught me, you'll love this answer, because the answer is, it depends. Better is such a subjective term anyway. There are some people whose writing I can't stand that other people just absolutely love, and other people who love the people that I can't stand, and vice versa. Like Shakespeare, for example. For me, I'm like, I can understand, and it's not for me. I'm very much into more modern writing. Because I was trained as a journalist, I'm also very into like realistic kinds of writing. So writing descriptions, languishing in language, flourishing with all the fountain of words that can pour forth, and using just the largest vocabulary I can, is not for me. There are other writers who specifically make it a point to look up a thesaurus, and like they sit there with it and choose to make those words so unique and special. Like they pour over every word, every sentence, every paragraph, and they want to make sure that it all works. I want to tell a story that makes sense, and also do it in a way that, yeah, like you can appreciate my writing. But you'll notice, like even in Porch Light, I'm telling a story. I'm not trying to think of creative words and describing the scenes in intricate detail. The whole goal behind that for me is that I want to leave it up to you, the reader, the listener, to imagine for yourself what it looks like. I haven't really described Nick. I barely described Casey. I described Omar a little bit. Kennedy has long hair, and that's about all we know about her, other than she's a drummer. But we've learned more about who she is as a person. And that, to me, is what's important. Is I don't want to focus on the details of how someone looks, or where they are, or what their scenery looks like around them, all that kind of stuff. What? I've got my dog sitting here next to me. He absolutely is adorable. Yeah. This is Chewy. This is Chewy, huh? He's such a sweet boy. Oh, he's a good boy. Oh, he's so tired. He had a long day of laying around doing nothing. I know. Life is so hard for you. So, yeah, ultimately the answer for being a better writer depends on what kind of writing you want to do. If you want to write similar styles to um, like Emily Dickinson or Jane Austen, stuff like that, it takes special skills to learn. So depending on where you want to go, you can learn those skills through writing workshops, reading the books, taking the language and formatting it for yourself, that kind of thing. So those would be my suggestions, is to figure out what kind of writer you want to be and then be better at being that kind of writer, using the kind of language that is important to you, that you want to read, and that you think other people want to read as well. So the next question is from a reader who's also a friend. Hello. Um, they asked, "Do you hear from your readers much? What kind of things do they say?" And the answer is no. I do not hear from my readers much. My books have gotten, I can count on both hands the number of reviews my books have gotten, and I'm not using all my fingers. That is the way that I hear from readers. There are a few friends of mine that have approached me in person to say, "Hey, like I'm reading your book, I love it," or this or that. Or um, there was one friend who started reading my fourth book, Puppy Love, um, and they were like, "You talked about like your back." They talked about like how the intro related to them in their specific situation, which I thought was really cool. Because I didn't know that that would be relatable to them. And so I'm excited that that was a thing for them, that they were like, oh, I totally relate to this character, um, which is nice. So, no, I don't hear from my readers much. I would love to hear more comments, sending me random messages. I have heard from many people who have purchased my books, and then I don't hear back from them, and my mind immediately goes to, they obviously hated it. That's not necessarily true in all the cases, so it's really interesting, because it'll go for months, and it just depends on people's reading, how often they read, how much they read. Sometimes people will be like, "I just bought a copy of your first book. I finally was able to get it, and now I'm sitting down to read it, and it's been like 2 years." So it ultimately depends. Again, like I love giving that answer. Apparently now it depends. But the short answer is no. I don't often hear from my readers. I would love to hear more, so that I can, because I think there's a lot of things in the books um, that can be talked about. I think there's a lot of things in my books that people can relate to, especially people in the queer community. And I think that that's important to let people know, that queer people don't struggle because of their queerness. The only struggles, those are external forces causing them to struggle. Um, Being queer, um, and I identify as gay, that is, the struggles that I faced all came from the outside. And so if I didn't have those outside struggles, being attracted to dudes is just like a thing. That's no big deal for me. It's just finding the right guy who would be interested in me and I would be interested in him. Instead, all these external forces were like, not only is it wrong, I'm going to persecute you on local public television and out you to everyone while you're working as a reporter. Not that I'm still bitter about that. Um, I'm trying to get over it. I've worked really hard. I've come a long way, but it's still absolutely unacceptable. So it would be nice to hear more from readers about the content of the book, so that I know if it's relatable. I want to make sure that I'm not offending people. I'm still learning as a queer person. I'm still learning about the community itself, and new identities are emerging, and people are being more open and honest about who they are, and finding language to support their identity. And I didn't know that that language existed in, all the time. So it's really become quite beautiful, all the diversity, and it's just making sure that I know what I'm talking about when I want to advocate properly and step aside for the people who can advocate for themselves, that I say, this person is this, and that's what this means. So I'm trying to still learn. And if I mess up, like I pointed out in the second chapter of Porch Light, I messed up. I talked about Omar, the record producer, and his skin color. And I haven't once mentioned Nick's skin color, or Casey's, or Kennedy's, or Levi's, because as I wrote this, I specifically was like, well, I want everyone to know that Omar is Black. And it was like, why? What's important about that? Is it important to his character? And ultimately, I think so. Being a person of color, being a Black person or a brown person, it's important, because you're discriminated against because of it. You're marginalized. And I know that I've been marginalized because I'm gay, and it's not the same thing. So being able to write characters that represent other cultures, it's important to me to make sure that I'm not offensive. So yes, hearing from my readers is nice, and it's also important to me to let me know how I'm doing. So in the long run, it's not just getting reviews, it's figuring out, hey, you said this about this character, and I noticed you didn't say this about any other character, and I'm wondering why. And when it comes to in chapter 2, where I said Omar was Black, the answer was I was ignorant. I wasn't aware at the time that I was making it seem like the other characters that I had introduced at that point were all white, and Omar was Black, and that was different, and that needed to be pointed out, because white is not the norm. Having white skin is not the baseline, and then everybody else is different. So it was a learning opportunity for me, and I haven't done that since. I tried different things in other books. We'll see how that turns out. It would be nice to hear feedback, especially from people of color or people who identify as bisexual, or who identify as non-binary in my other books, or who identify as trans. It would be nice to know that I'm representing those people fairly, and I'm representing them as people. Even if you don't like the person, if you say, no, I can easily identify that they're trans, and I didn't like them because of this reason, like they were a jerk off to this other person or whatever, like that's totally fine. If they are not likable specifically because of an identity like being queer or being a person of color, that's a problem for me. I don't want to have a dislikable character who's dislikable because they're Black. And I don't want to have a dislikable character because they're non-binary or whatever. So it's really important for me to get that feedback from readers. So long answer, summarized with, it's really important for me to hear from my readers so that I can make sure that I'm doing representation the way that it should be. In addition, reviews help me sell more books. And I like the things that when I spend time writing books, it takes away from other opportunities to make money, to where I can like buy food. And so it's nice when people buy books so I can use that money to buy food. So thank you. Those are the 2 questions for Chris. I have rambled on long enough. And now we're going to turn to chapter 9 of Porch Light. To summarize the last chapter, we found out that Nick had torn ligaments in his knee after getting hit by a car in the parking lot at work. Oh my goodness. Poor Nick. Casey rushed up to the hospital and was there for him. Nick also has to go back to Nashville to record some music. So that's going to be a thing to look forward to as we continue on reading. So we are at Porch Light by Chris Cole, Chapter 9, Getting Vocal. By the end of the week, I was learning to navigate my crutches pretty well. Stairs were still hard, and driving was impossible, so I was catching a lot of rides with Casey and Kennedy. I went back to work a few days later, only to tell Sandy that once again I was going to have to take off. She sighed. I'm not going to argue with you this time. How long will you be gone? Maybe a week, possibly 2. I'll be in the studio, but vocal work tends to take longer because I can't just sing for 14 hours straight. I mean, I can, it's just not healthy. Well, as long as you come back. Don't tell anyone, but you're my favorite employee. I pretended to be embarrassed. Sandy, you're only saying that because you don't have to see me as much now, or you're afraid I'm going to sue you. Sandy laughed. No, we've got good insurance for a reason, but we're going to try and make hers pay. You'll be covered no matter what. We caught it on camera. That girl would have hit you no matter what. Stupid people on their stupid phones. I nodded. I didn't even get to meet her face to face. I would have loved to scream in her face or something. Ham it up so she learns a lesson. Other than all that, how are things going? I mean, you're recording an album. That's got to be exciting, right? Oh, yeah. I mean, the excitement wore off for a minute just because of how much work it was, but I'm excited to go back. Nashville's a pretty cool place. She wagged her finger at me. Don't you think of running off on me now. I still need you here. You really are the best employee I've got. Until this whole rock star thing, you almost never asked for a day off or anything. Oh, you've got Bethany now. She's horrible. Stacy got up and closed the office door. She's leaving early and half-assing the projects I assign her, and she's taking too long to learn the system. I'm telling you, Junior, I want you to be the front desk manager. I'll demote her in a heartbeat if you say yes. I sighed and remembered what Casey had told me once before when I had complained about them trying to lowball me. He told me to highball them so they'd middleball me. I'd laughed at the time, but figured I'd give it a shot. Pay me $14 an hour and I'll do it. She sighed. I can't do that. She's not even making that much. She's making $10 an hour, right? That's what I was offered. So meet me in the middle at $12 an hour and I'll think about it. She bit her lip, squinting at me. I'll talk with Diego and see what we can do. But if we can offer you $12 an hour, I'd want you to start immediately. I can't put off doing the vocals. Hold off until I get back, okay? She frowned. I really don't want to wait that long. I'm swamped with picking up all her extra work. Heather can do some of the stuff. We have time in the morning, so we can help you a little. And I'll help you when I'm here, of course, and when I get back. She smiled. Okay, I'll let you head home. Yeah, I'm sure my ride's here by now. Casey got off work half an hour after I did. He worked as a barista at a local restaurant called Breakfast Brunch Brew, but he'd been working there since after high school, so he was a senior barista now. That means he didn't have to be there to open the place at 4 a.m. and could instead show up at 7 a.m. to close the store at 3 p.m. It usually took half an hour for him to get out of the shop, so I'd been killing time by hanging out in Sandy's office. There had only been one morning Casey hadn't been able to take me because he had to cover someone's shift, so Levi had been kind enough to take me. Levi worked at Sacagawea Elementary School as a teacher's aide for second graders. He'd had that job since graduation, since he worked so well with the younger kids when he was in school. According to Casey, little kids were mini rock star cats. They would fight and be going crazy one minute, then they'd be sweet and cuddly the next, and you could never trust them when they were going to be one way or the other. Plus, they were picky about their food. I hobbled out of the office to look out the front windows. Sure enough, there was Casey's little hatchback puttering outside. I said goodbye to the new girl and Bethany and snagged a soda I'd paid for before heading out the door. Casey leaned over and opened the door for me. I threw my crutches in the back seat and carefully got in the front. How was work? He slowly pulled away from the curb, looking around for cars or people. Fine. Sandy talked to me about the front desk manager job again. She actually might work with our hotel owner, that Diego guy, to see if they could swing $12 an hour. I mean, of course they can, but he's super cheap. I took your advice. You highballed her? He looked proud and leaned over and squeezed my thigh. I told you, man. I told you. Well, I hope you get it, but what's that going to mean for the band? You mean if our debut single reaches #1 and our album sells a bazillion copies? We quit our jobs, go on tour, and become rock stars. We never look back. It's crazy to think about, isn't it? If we become rock stars. Famous. He nodded, grinning. People all over the country, even the world, loving our music, coming to hear us play at huge concert venues. I shuddered. It took me a while to get used to the small crowds. Big ones, I'd have to figure out how to do that. He shook his head, looking at me in wonder. I just don't know how you have stage fright. I get up on stage and it's like an out-of-body experience. When I get up there, it's almost like I can't think. If the crowds get bigger, just remember to look at me. That always worked for you when we first started performing. Just look at me like it's just us at a jam session or something. I nodded as my stomach twisted. Yeah, that usually does work. Anyway, today's the day. We've got the gig and you've got a lover coming to see you sing. I blushed. Don't remind me. That makes me even more nervous than I already am. I turned on the radio to avoid talking about seeing Scott that night when I heard it. Our band name on the radio. They're a band from right here in King, and they've just released this single. This is Sorry by Taking Back Nick. And our song started to play. Casey and I looked at each other, and he immediately peeled into a local credit union parking lot, slamming the car into park and blasting the volume. We sat listening to our professionally recorded song. I could tell they used a little bit of auto-tune on my voice, but it otherwise sounded really good. The last chords played, and the DJ came back on. You heard it here first, folks. Sorry by Taking Back Nick. They're a new band, and if any of their other songs are like this, they're about to be big time. I screamed and started jumping up and down in my seat. Casey pumped his fists, and soon we were hugging each other. He grabbed my face and gave me a long kiss, pulling away with a huge grin on his face. We're really doing this! Holy shit, that just happened! My stomach was still fluttery from his kiss. It was the first time he'd kissed me sober. Yeah, our song, on the radio. We need to call Kennedy and Levi. But my phone was already ringing, and Kennedy's face popped up on the screen. I answered and immediately pulled the phone away from my ear as she was screaming her head off. I know! Oh my god! Casey got Levi on his phone, and we just sat there in the car, celebrating as a band. Oh man, our gig tonight is going to be lit. Kennedy, we have to post it to social media. I can't believe Omar didn't tell us. Do we have the music video? We looked ourselves up online, and sure enough, we had a music video. We all immediately shared it everywhere. Why didn't Omar tell us? It wasn't until we'd finished freaking out and gotten back to Casey's apartment that Omar called me. And he was not happy. They released it early. They weren't supposed to release the single until next Thursday. I specifically told them. That means we have to hurry to get you back out here as soon as possible to finish recording. When do you need me? Can we move up your flight a couple days? Can you leave Sunday instead? I looked at Casey, who nodded vigorously. That should work. I just need to get coverage for work. I'll redo your flight itinerary. Talk to you soon. I hung up and turned to Casey, who smiled. We need to celebrate. Let's pregame before the show. You know I don't like to drink before a show. He sighed. Fine, have water. I'll drink. Soon he was 2 beers in, and we had to leave in half an hour. You know you have to be sober to drive, right? I'm totally fine. I've got a high tolerance to alcohol now. He did seem to drive just fine, though he proceeded to get drunker throughout the show. He kept ordering drinks and taking big, long drinks between songs. It was very distracting to me, as Scott was sitting at a table near the front. He'd shown up in a tight black button-up shirt, which accentuated his broad chest and large arms. He'd greeted me with a hug, and we chatted for a minute before I went to help set up my keyboard and the mics. I introduced the next song, but while I did, I could hear Casey whispering to the other two. I didn't see what was happening behind me. It only just happened today, but our final song for tonight was actually played on the local KZYT rock station. It's part of our new record that will be debuting soon. This song is called Sorry. I turned around to see Casey wearing Levi's guitar. I immediately understood we were going to do the softer version. Performing with Casey gave me such a charge. I forgot all about the reasons why I was annoyed with him at the moment. The drinking, driving buzzed, and playing his instrument sloppily because of the drinking. But making eye contact with him while I sang the song we'd written together, The set ended to a huge amount of applause, and I stepped off stage to greet Scott. "Hey, what'd you think?" "You're all really talented. I can see why you got a record deal." Casey came over and put his arms around the two of us, breathing heavily in our faces. "Hey, you two. Making the sparks fly in here. Nikki, you didn't tell me Scott was such a hottie." I laughed, forcing a smile on my face. "Yeah, he is. Of course, I only saw him from a gurney. He looks much better when I'm standing up. I bet you think he'd look better on top of you all naked and sweaty." Scott's eyes widened and he looked at me in disbelief. "He's normally not this drunk. I'm sorry," I muttered to him, and then raised my voice. "Casey, can you go get me 2 waters? I'm really thirsty." He nodded, kissed me on the cheek, then walked off to the bar. I gave Scott a sheepish grin. "Sorry. He's also really affectionate when he gets drunk." "When did you two stop dating?" I laughed. He's straight." Scott burst out laughing. "That is one of the gayest guys I've ever met." "I mean, he says he's straight. Who am I to tell him otherwise? I just want him to be happy." He raised an eyebrow. "I imagine he'll be happier once he comes out. Mark my words. He's gay. And if he's not, he's at least gay for you." And that was Chapter 9 of Porch Light by Chris Cole. Chris Cole is me, and I am Chris Cole. Woohoo! Next week is Chapter 10. In Chapter 10, Nick gets a phone call that is a shock to everyone. So we'll see how that goes next week. Thank you all for tuning in. Let me know if you have any questions that I can answer, and I will get to them in an orderly fashion. I appreciate your listening so much. I would not be able to do this without you, so thank you. And I will see you next week on Chris's Creative Corner.